Welcome back to Palatable Politics with me, your host, Tapelo TJ Maslela. So I've received a few requests to break down BRICS, what it means, and what it's all about. So let's start by fundamentally BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And essentially these are countries from the global south, being developing countries, and the east, former Soviet Union countries, Russia, that have basically come together to pursue a developmental agenda which can protect and enhance the cooperation between the countries. There's three fundamental pillars which push for the cooperation of the BRICS countries. These three pillars are politics and security, finance and economics, cultural and people-to-people cooperation. So essentially the BRICS Summit came together to discuss, take resolutions and a way forward in terms of achieving these goals. Some of these decisions I've summarized being: one, a call for a reform of the UN. Basically, they call for inclusion of emerging and developing countries in the member council, but also in the Security Council. And also a greater participation of women at all levels. They also reaffirmed the support and the call for a transparent and a fair multilateral trade system through the WHO, World Trade Organization. That if they are beneficial or differential treatment, it is for emerging economies to basically support that development. There's also a call for support for a robust global financial safety net with a quota-based and adequately resourced IMF at its core. IMF, right? So basically the IMF in the 16th general review of the quotas basically took a decision that they're going to review the quotas and participation of countries. And basically the call from the BRICS Summit was that if there are any changes to that quota, it should be one that has a greater participation of emerging and developing countries in the quota. They reiterated the principle of African solutions for African problems, especially with the concerns in Sudan and Libya. And I mean, we've generally seen how African problems generally have a, let's say, interference from other states. So basically, they call for that independence and that we as African nations be allowed to solve our own problems. There was a call on counter-terrorism measures, that there shouldn't be any bias. So people shouldn't be targeted based on ethnicity, religion, nationality, citizenship, etc., that there should be no double standards. Terrorism should be treated as terrorism and just be fought outright. Corruption. Yeah, we all know the challenges we have with corruption. We know that as SA we have big corruption problems. We know we have them in Africa as a continent, and we know we have them globally across all the continents. So basically, the BRICS Summit took a decision that we should all work together, share information, integrated investigation, prosecution and recovery of stolen assets. All of this naturally, limited or within the confines of each country's own laws and regulations. It noted the high level of countries with high debt. And the implication of high debt, particularly on African countries, is it reduces a government's ability to fund and spend on social issues. So, I mean, if a country spends half of its budget, taxpayers' money, on repaying debts, it means that there's less money for fighting crime, for roads, for infrastructure. So basically, they're saying that there should be initiatives to reduce that debt, manage the debt. And one of the ways to address the debt is through the implementation of the G20 Common Framework for Debt Treatment. We'll go into that a different day. Furthermore, there was a recognition that the BRICS countries collectively are responsible for a third of the global food production. So there has to be a more deliberate attempt to secure, enhance, and grow this, not only for the benefit of BRICS countries, but as a global issue that we all need to eat. There was a call for BRICS and the African Free Trade Agreement to work closely together. It has the potential to move African countries in particular away from being a raw materials export to having value-added products exported, basically increasing the value chain from basically when a piece of diamond is taken out the ground to it being sold off as a ring, etc. There's another very interesting one, which I don't think has gotten as much attention as it should have in the media, which is the BRICS Payment Task Force. So essentially, this is a task force that's been put together to look at ways for the BRICS countries to be able to trade amongst themselves in a payment system that will facilitate the use of local currencies and also just reduce the reliance on not only the dollar, but other payment systems like, your Visa, your MasterCard. And you see the importance on this when you look at when sanctions were imposed in Russia around the war with Ukraine, that Visa and MasterCard, American Express, etc., all cut off their systems. But because Russia had its own payment system, they were able to continue business as is. Few glitches here and there, but fundamentally the sovereignty of Russia was able to be held through this payment system. I mean, imagine not being able to use your card to swipe. You understand that. Furthermore, on the local currencies aspect, this one we've all heard about is the development of a currency for BRICS nations, basically a currency alternative to the dollar. So the respective ministers of finance and Reserve Bank governors have all been given the mandate to work on this, find a sustainable solution, currency, whatever it is, and they are supposed to report back at the next BRICS Summit, which will be held in Russia next year. Another interesting one, they welcomed the establishment of a BRICS think tank network for finance. Essentially, this, it is what it is a think tank for ways in which finance for businesses in particular can be enhanced. And a framework, an operational guidelines framework was adopted, and this was pushed under the SA stewardship. So shout out to us for that. There's the implementation of sustainable development goals, which obviously pushes for eradication of poverty and fighting climate change to preserve biological diversity. Here's another one, a big one for all of us. SA, as a chair, was pushing for the transformation of educational skills and development across BRICS nations with a look for the future. So essentially what this is they look at cooperation across the entire education system, starting from an earlyhood childhood development system to a recognition of qualifications from the respective universities, and also lastly from a TVET education aspect. So that basically a greater alignment in terms of skills that are taught at TVET colleges and those required in the workplace, which directly address the employment challenges we have as BRICS nations. There is the BRICS Youth Summit, which was recently held now, and basically the Youth Summit is a youth BRICS, which basically coordinates and facilitates the engagement of youth participation across youth. So that one's for you and I, but they also welcomed the Youth Council Framework for BRICS. They celebrated the BRICS Business Forum, their 10-year anniversary, and what would a BRICS Summit be without women? Exactly. So there was also the BRICS Women Business Alliance, which fundamentally pushed for access to finance, access to land, and also market access for women farmers. So shout out to that. And lastly, the big one is the addition of the new members. So we know of Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. All of these will start being members of BRICS from the 1st of January 2024. So what does this mean for you and I? Okay, let's break that down. Increased trade between BRICS countries means increased production, more jobs. More jobs, less reliance on government. Government, one, gets more tax, but also has to spend less money on grants, etc. That means more money for infrastructure, being your roads, universities, schools, etc. So that's one of the big takeaways from BRICS, or the potential impact that BRICS has. Another one is the use of a local currency. Another example of how this affects us is the exchange rate risk. In accounting, that's an accounting term which basically highlights the risk or potential risk that one has from using a foreign currency as a base for trade. So we'll give an example of a phone. You have $1 for R1, and this iPhone is $100. If all of a sudden now the exchange rate goes to R5 to $1, this phone that was $100, 100 Rand, is now 500 Rand for that same iPhone at $100. So when you have a local currency, you mitigate that risk, which also translates into inflation. And we've seen what the impact of a high inflation is. Increased exchange rates to try and manage that. That's directly on our pockets. Another one is sovereignty. Like I used the example of Russia, where them having their own payment system meant that they were less affected by sanctions and essentially had more sovereignty. We've seen how sanctions can be used to influence other countries' decisions. I don't think we need any examples of this. So guys, that's it. I hope that this has been informative. Join, subscribe, like, share, and all those things. And when you're done all of that, let's support these guys tonight. Thank you for tuning in.